Good afternoon. Why don't we get started? My name is Paul Mellenbach. I'm a shareholder at Foster Swift in the Southfield office. And with me today is my partner, Alex Rusek, who is a shareholder in our office in Lansing. Alex is despite his looks, is a veteran lawyer. He has handled many lawsuits for the firm and for in his career with another firm before joining us, and has vast experience in our topic today. In particular, we thought this would be a good time of year to introduce the topic of the unintended consequences that college students may fear or may face. It's the parents that fear that the college student may face. As a parent of former college students, it certainly was a very stressful time for me and my family, and sending my kids off to college because of all the things that they can get themselves involved in unintentionally. And fortunately, mine didn't. But certainly, as attorneys, we get calls from parents often who have some kids in college that do get themselves in some situations. So we thought it'd be a good idea to discuss this with Alex this afternoon. And without further ado, I just have a couple of questions. Alex, could you talk a little bit about what seems to be a very hot topic today over the past 6 months to a year, not only for college students, but for all of us, about the topic of artificial intelligence and the academic dishonesty and cheating?
Great. Good afternoon, and thank you, Paul. And good afternoon to everyone joining us today. If Paul didn't mention it, I'm more than happy to ask questions. And if you put them in our chat as we're going through our conversation today, we can answer those at the end. So please put them in the chat and they'll make their way to us. So to give a little bit of background about why is artificial intelligence even a topic we need to talk about, we have to first ask ourselves, okay, what really is artificial intelligence? We have a lot of buzzwords, and it's a big tech buzzword right now and over the last year. But what is it really? When we get down to the most basic explanation of what artificial intelligence is, it's merely a computer program that does its best to mimic the way that people think and learn. So, just about a year ago, you've probably heard of a program called ChatGPT. It made tons of waves in November of last year because it's what's called a generative artificial intelligence program. And what people can use ChatGPT for, wide range of things. But for our discussion today, probably the most important is that ChatGPT can actually generate things like book reports. It can generate answers to tests. Anything that a human can do as far as writing, a lot of these programs can imitate that in many ways. So for the kids going off to school, finishing up their first couple weeks here, why is that important to them? Every school has some kind of policy against plagiarism, and using generative artificial intelligence certainly falls right into that realm of plagiarism. So what is artificial intelligence good for then if it counts as plagiarism, not doing your own work? Well, you and your students and children will probably find that ChatGPT is a great starter if you're going to be doing things like writing a paper. It gives you a great idea of where to start. But you have to be careful not to overuse it and not to submit something that is only generated by ChatGPT. Earlier this year, we actually had an attorney who was caught using ChatGPT in New York in a lawsuit. That attorney got caught because when the court looked at what he had submitted, it didn't make sense. ChatGPT had actually invented case law, and it can do the same things to your students. So if they were to submit a paper, it may have a citation in there that's completely made up. So not only are you plagiarizing, you could be submitting just made up work. Nothing good can come of that. So students do need to know that while artificial intelligence, it's here to stay, it can be very helpful. There's a lot of great uses for it. You really, really have to be careful when you start using these kinds of programs in conjunction of trying to do some kind of schoolwork and submit that. So the rest of our conversation today, Paul, we're going to be talking more about criminal law and the impacts that can have on students.
All right, well, let's
For the-
talk about that a little bit, Alex. Certainly appreciate that update on artificial intelligence. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about alcohol and controlled substances. What is your advice on that to parents?
Absolutely, Paul. I've unfortunately had the honor of representing dozens and dozens of young people who get caught up in some kind of legal trouble because of alcohol or controlled substances. So what are the basics? If you're a freshman in college, you're 18 years old, you cannot go buy alcohol. We all know that. 21 is the legal age for alcohol. 21 is also the legal age for recreational marijuana, the only exception being if you have a medical marijuana card issued by Michigan or another state. So with those in mind, we also have to think about what's illegal on the federal level. And although Michigan has decriminalized the possession and use of marijuana, unfortunately, the federal government still has marijuana scheduled and outlawed. So what kind of trouble can this cause for a student who gets caught up? I see a lot of drunk driving offenses. We're seeing more and more drug driving offenses, particularly with the rise of marijuana use after its legalization in the state. We see a lot of issues that come up from the use and abuse of prescription drugs. In particular, Adderall is a very big one that's popular on campuses, both at the high school level and at the university college level as well. We see it very often. So there's a wide range of these criminal prosecutions that could take place because of the improper use of controlled substance or alcohol. So what is that?
Alex, can I interrupt real quick? Is there just from my experience in being an attorney and having done some criminal defense work in the past, has it been your experience that there's normally a little bit of leniency with students that are charged with a first offense of alcohol, such as a minor in possession or those type of offenses where they're put on probation and then it doesn't go on their record? Could you explain what that procedure is, and if that still exists?
Fortunately, in Michigan, we have numerous laws that are in place to help young people. So even though your college-age student, your child may find themselves in trouble, there are a lot of alternatives if it's a first offense. We have what's called 333.7411. It's a statute for first-time offenders who get caught using some kind of illegal narcotics. We also have a program called the Homes Youthful Trainee Act, and that's a program for people under 25 who commit an offense. And under that program, you actually can have the case sealed and the case will be dismissed if that person successfully completes whatever their term of probation is. And that carries with it some really, really great benefits, because when a student's in trouble, not only are they facing potential jail time, potential fines, they also have a lot of other concerns that don't really come to us initially, but what we call collateral consequences. And some of those that students and their parents really have to be aware of. A conviction for any narcotic use can have an impact on the person's ability to get federal loans. We also have issues where a student may be disciplined if the conduct happened on campus. So that could be some kind of probation or even suspension, depending on the circumstances. So when this does arise, we have friends and family members who find themselves in difficult position. It's really important to get an attorney involved at the early stages so that we can start preparing to hopefully, worst case scenario, have one of these young people enter into an alternative program to, give them a second chance, essentially. It's to prevent, we know that young people don't make the best decisions. And fortunately, we do have that opportunity for them in Michigan, for them to get a second chance and start things over and start things on the right foot, really.
Thanks, Alex. What about some of the other criminal offenses that often college students get involved in, like theft and assault and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we have a whole panoply of offenses that students can find themselves being accused of or charged criminally with. I see a couple of different areas in my practice pretty often. We have a lot of like assault and battery type charges. And those come a lot of times when, again, alcohol and narcotics are involved. Particularly, we see a lot of, essentially drunken fights, both on campus and at bars that may have overserved someone. So parents should definitely be having a conversation, not just about alcohol, but also how people act when they're under the influence and maybe when they've been overserved. Because we just see though that combination so often of people getting in trouble with alcohol being mixed into the equation. We also see a lot of theft crimes. So that's one where you do have to sit down and talk with your student and explain to them, hey, this may be your dorm. You may lock the door every day, but you still have to be careful. You have to make sure you take proper precautions because theft does run rampant on college campuses. We also see a good amount of what may be referred to as intimate partner violence. Formerly, you may have heard it called domestic violence. And we see, unfortunately, a lot of young men in particular who are charged with crimes such as domestic violence, both for activities and offenses that occur on campus, but also off campus as well.
In terms of the practicality of it, Alex, say one of a student gets arrested, and say, for example, it's in East Lansing, and they've been taken to the police, and their first call is to their parents. What should the parent do at that point? They get that call at 3 o'clock in the morning, and certainly, not a lot of us hopefully have been involved with the criminal justice system to any extent whatsoever. What would you advise them to do at 3 o'clock in the morning when their child's in jail?
It's a scary situation to be in, Paul. You may have a student, your child, who's giving you a call from some kind of drunk tank. They don't know what's going on. They're in a situation they've likely never been in before. Everyone's scared. There are some steps that parents have to take in that situation to put themselves and their child in the best position possible going forward. So first off, if you get that call, you have to assume that everything that you say and everything that your child is saying is being recorded on that line at the jail. Anything that they say can be used against them in a criminal prosecution. So even though you may be dying to ask the question of what happened, what's going on exactly, as a parent, how can you help when you have all these questions running through your head? And you really have to kind of push back and fight those feelings and do what's best for your child. And that means, one, not talking about the allegations, about where they were, anything like that, because they could incriminate themselves by what they say. And then, you also want to just be supportive. So my advice about them not talking about the phone, that only goes so far as talking about what they're alleged to have done. I always say, feel free to talk about, how they're feeling, how things are going as far as conditions of where they're at. You should be informing them that they should not talk to any law enforcement, anyone that's in lockup with them. They should not be talking about the allegations at all unless it's to their attorney and in a controlled environment. Once that initial conversation has happened, there's going to be some steps that occur pretty quickly. The likelihood is that the person who is arrested, in this case, we'll say in East Lansing, 3 in the morning, they're probably not going to go in front of a judge right away. More than likely, they'll first see the judge, maybe the afternoon after, maybe the next day. Either way, it's going to be within 48 hours, unless there's other extenuating circumstances. At that point, the student will be arraigned, they'll be read the charges against them, and bond will be set. Before this, it's always best practice to get in contact with an experienced criminal defense attorney so that they can start working on the case from that very initial starting point, so that you can get a bond where your child can be out, going to school, doing what they need to be doing. All of that is much, much easier to handle from my end, particularly when I become involved in a matter sooner rather than later, because there's just more hurdles the longer that you wait, unfortunately.
Will the parents be allowed to talk to the police at all in those situations, or are they just just talking to the student themselves or their child themselves?
Sure. So there's no obligation for the police to talk to a parent, but more than likely, if you call them and you have a conversation, you can find out. Most officers are willing to share what's going on. Now, you want to be extremely careful when you do that because, one, you don't want to make the officer angry or anything like that and get a bad report going to a prosecutor at one point. But you also don't want to help build the case against your child as well. And that can be like telling the police certain facts. Perhaps you confirm or deny that they were in a certain place that night. So you want to be very careful. I wouldn't recommend for parents to reach out directly to the involved law enforcement. Most of the time, you're not going to do anything productive, and there is an opportunity to do some harm as well and put your child in a worse spot than they would be. So I would generally advise against that. And for all the parents joining us today, you can rest easy that you will get a much fuller picture of what's going on when the police reports are shared and things like that, which usually occurs about 1 to 3 weeks after the initial arraignment. Of course, that depends on the court and jurisdiction, but all of that information does get turned over eventually. So best practice is shut things down, protect your child at that initial stage, and then we can start working to put them in the best position possible going forward.
Thanks, Alex. One more topic that I think is important is Title IX and consent for sexual activity. Do you see that in your representation of students?
We see it all the time, Paul, and I've represented probably dozens of students who have been involved with Title IX matters, both at Michigan State and everywhere else across the state. Title IX is important and a lot of resources are being dedicated to it. So what is Title IX? Title IX is a series of federal laws that were first enacted back in, I believe, 1972 or so. And what they do is they prohibit discrimination in higher education when that discrimination is based on gender. And our courts have routinely held that gender-based violence is a form of gender discrimination. So what does that mean? It often comes up that we'll have two students on campus, again, maybe alcohol or controlled substance are involved, and some kind of sexual assault occurs. So the person who commits the sexual assault, they'll be prosecuted for any criminal penalties that they may face by a prosecutor. At the same time, though, they're likely going to have these Title IX proceedings going on simultaneously. And these proceedings include an investigative part, as well as a hearing portion to push back against the allegations, depending on which side you're on. So we see this just almost every day. New cases are coming in this area, Paul. We could talk about Title IX for days. There's so much to talk about on the topic, but really, let's getting down to the brass tacks here. What do you do if your student's faced with one of these complaints? The procedures, they differ by every university, every school system, but generally what happens is that the student receives notice that a complaint's been filed against them. It's probably going to their student email account, so your students should be checking those for official notices. At that point, they need to have some kind of representation. That representation will assist them. I always like to assist my clients to understand exactly what the proceedings are, what they mean, and of course, responding to any allegations, and in particular, false allegations as well. There are some serious consequences if someone is found to have violated Title IX, and that includes everything from basically a slap on the wrist to probation, to suspension, and even expulsion from the university. And to add on even more to that is that if a student does have a finding of responsibility against them for violating Title IX, then their likelihood of going to another university is highly diminished. It will follow them, and these kind of proceedings have to be taken very seriously because of those long-lasting effects that they can have on the students going long into the future.
Similar to the court system, are Title IX violations, if there's a finding of liability, are those, can those be, I don't want to call it swept under the rug, but can they be, is there a first offense that's allowed in this scenario, or is it going to stick with them for the rest of their life?
Sure, that's a great question, Paul. There really is no mechanism for like a first-time offender to have this not follow them. But what we can do is that there are mechanisms, depending on the school and the procedures, to negotiate resolutions that can accomplish that in effect. But there's no statute like the Homes Useful Trainee Act or 7411 that would apply in those situations. So they are very serious and they have to be addressed as soon as possible. I should mention also that if your student receives some kind of Title IX complaint, there are going to be very specific timelines, just like in a court case, that they're going to have to follow. Otherwise, they can essentially be what's called defaulted and have a finding of responsibility against them if they don't take some action. So it's very important not to ignore these issues when they come up. And the sooner that you get assistance, the better.
Well, thank you, Alex, and thanks for everything. We're kind of running a little bit tight on time, and would just like to open up for the next 8 minutes. Anybody has any questions? If you want to ask them verbally, you can unmute yourself and ask them, or you can just submit a question into the chat, and Alex will be happy to answer them for you. So why don't we give a couple minutes to see if anybody has any questions, and we'll go from there.
And I'll say as well, Paul, as we're closing out here and people are typing their questions in the chat if they have any, I'm also available to discuss any situations that may come up with students. And I believe that my direct contact information, as well as yours, was put into the chat earlier during our presentation.
And thank you. All right, the question is, how do you reach or get a hold of an attorney on the weekend, or does it just have to wait until Monday?
Sure. So I answer my phone as much as I can on the weekend. I always recommend emailing. I check it almost constantly, 7 days a week. So email is probably the best if it's after hours or on the weekend. But phone calls, those are just fine as well.
Question is, do you text of this that we can follow a PowerPoint or transcript perhaps? We do have a we do play it off of the website. We don't have a text of it, but we can you can review it by going to the website and locating it there. And I'm not sure how long it stays up. I understand it stays up for quite a long period of time.
That's correct, Paul. It should be posted for quite a while. And if anyone would like a link to that, just send me an email or Paul an email, and we'll distribute the link when it's up.
And certainly, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Alex or me, but Alex primarily. And if you have any questions about anything that he's talked about today, I'm sure he'll be willing and happy to talk about that. Next question is, how can an attorney help if my college student is charged with academic dishonesty because they have been used by ChatGPT?
That's a great question, and that is a hot topic right now. So when your child is going through some kind of academic dishonesty proceedings, almost every college permits them to have an advisor. That advisor is oftentimes a faculty member who may or may not be able to advocate on their behalf in the best way possible. I always recommend seeking out an attorney who has experience in this area, especially with new hot button issues such as ChatGPT. There's really, really interesting discussions going on about how to detect whether or not artificial intelligence was used to write a paper. So you really want to go and get assistance from an attorney that understands some of the complex issues and the underlying technology that these students are facing some real difficulties when they try to implement it.
All right. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? All right. If not, please be sure to tune back in on November 8th, 2023. Cliff Hammond and Ray Littleton are going to discuss an 11th Circuit Court case that recently came out relating to hiring and DEI considerations. That would be at the same time at noon on November 8th of 2023. And if there's nothing further, I thank you, Alex, for coming out today or talking on in your office anyway today, and appreciate everybody showing up. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to everyone again for coming and listening. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, email or phone at your convenience.